All right, I'm ready now to start on the first topic for today, and I'm going to start with evaluation and talk a little bit about that before going on to monitoring and control. Remember, in the PMDPro1 course, we had a table that listed monitoring in one column and evaluation in another column, and it said what is monitoring, what is evaluation, why do we do monitoring, why do we do evaluation, when do we do monitoring, when do we do evaluation, how monitoring, how evaluation. Now what I've done is I've given you the content for half of the chart. So I've given you the what of monitoring, the why of evaluation, the when of monitoring, and the how of evaluation. What I'd like you to do is now to read what's on there and to see how much of the information that you can fill in the missing cells here to see how much you're remembering and understanding about monitoring and evaluation. So go ahead and do that now. Monitoring basically is a continuous process that you're checking activities against actual results. You're checking what was planned versus what actually happened. And so sometimes those are called variances, the difference. And that is then to suggest whether or not corrective action might be needed. Whereas evaluating is a little bit different. It's not a continuous, but it's progress toward delivery basically of the outcomes and the goals, taking in mind also activities and outputs, which are primarily the focus of monitoring. We do monitoring in order to be able to keep up with what's happening on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis so that changes can be made. So we're trying to identify issues in order to alert the project manager and team so that they can think about and consider actions that should be taken to try to manage or remedy those situations, and that can be human, financial, and material resources. Whereas evaluation is making more of a judgment about effectiveness, to learn how well things have been done to make a judgment on the success or failure of the project. And of course, monitoring is done continuously, sometimes on a day-by-day basis as you're implementing, whereas evaluation is usually done more periodically. Of course, there has to be baseline information collected. Often there's a midterm evaluation, an end of project, and then sometimes a post-project evaluation. And then the documentation is what's listed on the how. Evaluation is concerned about the causal logic between the outcomes and the goal. In other words, we're concerned about the impacts, the higher level changes. That means that what you're trying to produce in project management, the outputs are important, but what's most important is that they're contributing toward the higher level population types of changes that you want to see as a result of the processes and the products that are being produced in the project. So that's the purpose of evaluation. Now, I want you to think about log frame for a minute. And again, this is a question that will ask you to try to remember. Remember, a log frame in PMDPro is a 4x4 matrix with 16 cells. I want you to take a few minutes and to identify what each level of the hierarchy of objectives are. Write that in over here, and then on top I'd like you to write in what goes into each one of these columns. If you got that correct, you should have the hierarchy of objectives being activities at the lowest level, then outputs, then outcomes, then goal. And across the top, then, of course, you have the description of the hierarchy of objectives, the indicators for measurement, the means of verification, and then the assumptions. So hopefully you remember a little bit about the log frame. Now, the question that I want you now to consider is, how could we use the log frame as an evaluation tool? Okay, I hope that you've included some of the points that I have up here on the screen, because there are a lot of connections between the log frame and evaluation, and I hope that you were able to identify many of them. First of all, the objectives, particularly the outcomes and the goal, are the highest change that the project is seeking, and that's what evaluation is trying to measure. Secondly, the indicators, especially the indicators at the outcome level, detail how the change or improvement is going to be measured. So it tells the evaluators how they're going to do their job. And then thirdly, the log frame details the assumptions. And the assumptions are especially important at the outcome level for evaluation, and they are connected to a tool, the tool we call the risk register. And they need to be managed carefully, and that's part of what you're going to be looking at in the evaluation project. The means of verification obviously are important because they provide a description of how the evaluation indicators are going to be measured and how the data will be gathered. The log frame provides a description of the logic model for the results and impacts of the intended project. And finally, all the changes brought about by the control processes during implementation will be explained as variances from the information contained in the log frame. So the log frame is really the foundation tool, and you're looking to see, did the actual changes, especially at the results level, at the outcome level, at the impact level, at the goal level, really meet the expectations that were raised as part of the log frame. And the log frame, of course, is part of the proposal in the identification and design phase. Now, the tool that is probably the most important tool, and it's often prepared during the identification and design phase or as part of the proposal. It's called the monitoring and evaluation plan, and it is a matrix. Again, it's a different matrix from the log frame, but it builds upon what's in the log frame. So on the vertical column, you again have the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, the goal, and the hierarchy. Now, I'd like you to think back. Remember, what is it that goes into these columns up here? And I'd like you to think about that and then to write them. Hopefully, you identified that the first column is just a listing of the indicators, and that actually is copied directly from the log frame itself. Secondly is what information is going to be needed, specifically detailing the information that will be necessary in order to fulfill that indicator. What are the sources of information and the methods of data collection? That's being a lot more specific than the means of verification that were in the log frame. Who's going to collect? We see a list of names in here, the frequency of collection, and then how and who are going to use this information. Hopefully that brings back some memories. Okay, The next tool I want to talk about in relation to evaluation is the project charter. And I want you to think about what we studied about project charter during the PMDPro1 course and fill in the blanks in these 4 statements here. The answers to this then are: the project charter describes the project with limited detail. In other words, it's a summarized document. It's not the details that you would find in the proposal or the identification and design document. The charter formally authorizes a project and links to the ongoing work of the organization. It gives project manager the authority to proceed and apply resources. It's a decision gate. It's like opening the door to being able to spend money and to start doing activities. And it serves as a living document. In other words, the project charter will change as decisions are made to control the project over the lifetime of the project. All right, so remember, and I'm just showing you an example of a project charter, and it should be a short document. I would say 5 pages or less, so it's much more concise and summarized than the proposal, and it has some information that you wouldn't have in the proposal. Now, this is the first half, and this probably is similar to the proposal in terms of the executive summary, business case, and project definition, but the second page would be a little bit different. You're going to summarize the budget, not the detailed budget, the resources that are available, those are there, but then the risk assessment. Sometimes the risk assessment is done as a separate document, and I actually encourage you to think about doing it that way because it's easier to manage sometimes when it's done as a separate document. And then finally, this is something that you won't find in the proposal, is the project organization. Who is the project manager? Who are the team members? What are their roles and responsibilities? All right, and then as I said, I encourage you to do risk management either as part of the charter or as a separate document. And remember that we said you could do risk management as a qualitative document, or we encouraged you to think about giving quantitative values in a couple of areas. One would be, after listing the risk, what is the probability that that risk might happen, and give that a score of, say, 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. And then if that risk were to happen, were to become a reality, what would the impact of that risk be? And so in this case, they've given it an impact of 4. And then you can then get some composite numbers by multiplying those two together. So 5 times 4 equals 20. And then if you did several risk, you'd have several scores, and you could use those as a way of determining which of the risk might be the highest priority for management. And of course, it's extremely important to give responsibility to a person for managing and eventually coming to some kind of resolution of that problem. So the question that I want you to think about and answer is, how could we use the project charter as an evaluation tool? I hope that you had some ideas. Here are some ideas that I came up with. First of all, since the charter is a living document, in other words, it's going to change as implementation takes place, it will provide details about all the major changes that were made, including a description of the issues that caused the change and the issue management and resolution processes, as well as the authorization processes utilized. So the evaluation team will be very interested in that information because that's going to be the log or the record of what has changed in terms of the thinking and implementation planning and the approvals that have happened since the proposal was written, and it will allow them then to draw their conclusions to make their evaluation judgments with those changes in mind. Secondly, the evaluation team can look at a charter to determine how many objectives and indicators were modified during an implementation, especially those indicators that are at the outcome and the goal levels. That's extremely important because evaluation is driven by objectives that are drawn from the log frame itself, and if there have been changes, you don't want them to be doing their evaluation on those indicators that have been changed. And then thirdly, by looking at the risk register, the evaluation team can make informed judgments about how risk have influenced the intended impact to see if the risk that have actually come true and become issues, or if the management of those risks will have somehow affected the way that the project was implemented and the results and the impacts that came about.